All right, we're going to call the March 26th meeting of the Water Pollution Control Authority to order at 7:30 p.m. on the dot. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Moving along, do I have approval of the minutes from February 26th?
So move.
Mr. Kadim, do I have a second? Ms. Dancho, second. All in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Tom. Moving along to item number 3, report by the town engineer, Mr. John Casey. Hi, John.
Hello. I'll be brief. I handed out my memo today, and attached to the memo is a summary report from Ty and Bond as well. On the I&I project, the town has applied for the funding for Clean Water Fund for this SSES project, and we've signed the contract with the vendor and authorized the vendor to start the work that's going to happen this spring, but not any of the other work until we get the final grant paperwork. But DEP is preparing the agreement, and they've told us that the funding is there. We want to get started this spring because if you look at the next page, there's a little graph there, and the orange is this year's groundwater level, and you can see it's rising higher than the other 2 previous years, so this is a good time to be able to see if we're getting groundwater infiltration into the sewer system better than the last 2 years. So we do want to take advantage of the high groundwater table and get that project started. In the meantime, Time Bond is working on calibrating their hydraulic model of the sanitary sewer collection system. The treatment plant has been providing a lot of information on current flow information. They've been looking at the conditions of the sewers during the rain events to see how it matches up with their model, and they're trying to change the model to reflect the real world conditions. So that's an ongoing item, and it kind of affects the conclusions of the study, so they need to get it right. The sewer lining project, we have authorized the contractor to get going, but he hasn't scheduled the work yet. We are going to be TVing those other couple of sewers that we talked about last month and assessing them and getting back to you with a recommendation on those other sewers at Ferry and Lordship Boulevard. The 6 pump station project is, still under design. The engineer has looked at the structural integrity of some of the buildings because we are asking them to look at flood proofing the building in the event of a coastal flood event. And we're actually meeting on Thursday to review with the structural engineer because they're finding that the buildings may not be structurally sound enough to support the water if the water is not allowed to enter the building and kind of equalize the pressure. Right. So we're going to meet on that, and we'll be getting back to you, but we will have to make a decision how much effort to put into flood-proofing the building versus what the benefit of flood-proofing the building would be versus, in other words, cost and benefit of the 2 options. So that's what we'll be talking about on Thursday.
John, would that be for all 6 stations?
Is primarily the ones in the coastal area. Yeah. Peck's Mill is in the riverine flooding, but there's a large wetland there, so I don't think it's as big of an issue. So it's really the coastal pump stations in Lordship and Benton Street and Ryan's Lane.
Thank you.
And then related to that is the connection to the Shelton public sewer system, which drains into Stratford. The request to connect to the sewer, which drains into Stratford. We had asked the engineer to look at the capacity of the 2 projects that they have been evaluating. One is the Ryan's Lane pump station, and the other is the trunk sewers that lead from Ryan's Lane pump station down to the treatment plant. And they feel that the Ryan's Lane pump station would require to be upgraded for increased size pumps. However, they haven't yet been able to conclude the impact on the trunk sewer capacity because of the modeling issue that they're still trying to work out. So they don't have a recommendation on that project at this time.
But they did recommend that if that project were to go through, that the Riders Landing pump station would need to be improved.
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, that's one of the pump stations where we are designing, so it's just a matter of upgrading the pump size.
To fit that capacity. Any questions? Yes, absolutely. Any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Mr. Casey, do we have a perspective on the cost of upgrading riders to handle the new development from Shelton? And if we make that commitment to upgrade it, is it a substantial number? And what if they don't do the development?
It's not substantial. I think they estimated 12 to 24 hours of engineers' time to calculate what's needed and to incorporate them into the plans. And then they're getting the cost of the pump size upgrades, and some of the controls would change. So we haven't gotten those costs yet, so I'll let you know. Regardless of this particular development, the bigger question is how much flow can Shelton give us? So we're not designing upgrading the pump station necessarily for the station, but just to make sure we're able to handle all the flow that Shelton had estimated back in 2005, what their total flow would probably be during our planning period. So they were estimating 300,000 gallons per day, and they're currently at about half that, so they would still, there's still room to grow, and we would be, wanting to make sure our system could handle it.
Mr. Casey, actually, Wally.
Yes, how you doing? Good to see you. My question, I'm sorry, I got to take notes. Anyway, my concern is always the same, is that are we overbuilding or opening up ourselves to have more problems with the pumps? We're getting them all set up, ready to go to handle what we offer in our town. Also, there's so much building going on. I'm always concerned about the pump's capacity to be able to handle it. Also, where's the waste going? And we always spoke about fracking, a long time ago, but we also spoke about the fact that people put wipes in their toilet that affects the motors, and we spoke about a solution, which is really great. I'm glad someone jumped on that. So that's my big concern, is like it's not putting too much pressure on the pumps that we do have, and overworking them to a place where we're constantly having to fix them and putting us more in debt in terms of the taxpayers having to pay to continue to keep the flows going. That's all.
So again, we'll upgrade the one pump. The next pump station downstream does have capacity, so it's not an issue. And then it's just that trunk sewer that leads to the treatment plant, which is under investigation still.
Okay, thank you. Please keep me up to date. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Casey? No? Mr. Casey, you all set? Thank you, sir. Excellent. Moving along, item number 4, report by Mr. Tom Hyde, Plant Superintendent. Hi, Tom.
Good evening. Good evening, Board. This month's report's pretty brief. During February, we had only one violation, which was in the nitrogen, which is anticipated. It's seasonally typical, as are the high flow rates that are causing them. Our flow rates are currently lowering at this time. I was looking at it, and if it doesn't rain, we'll be back to about normal toward the end of this week. And the system operates off an annual 12-month average, so it's just, we're right where we should be, a little bit better than we were last year. The second item, the final effluent pump was installed as scheduled on the 26th of February. It's got a couple of small issues, a faulty seal and a faulty pressure relief valve, which the vendors are reevaluating and replacing. And finally, the UV disinfection system upgrade. It began on March 6th. It had a couple of setbacks, which can be somewhat anticipated, as we're working with a 10-year-old piece of equipment and we're trying to bring it back to a new life. But the vendor is working to resolve the issues, and to keep them interested, we're simply holding off the payments until they're resolved.
Excellent.
That's all I have for you today.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde. Any questions for Mr. Hyde? Nope. Hearing none. Thank you. Item number 5, an old business tabled item. As was mentioned before, the previous request from the February 26th meeting for sewer property, from the sewer from a property in Shelton, 704, 712, 725 River Road. I'd like to remain on the table pending the final study, the I&I capacity from Teague and Bond, as Mr. Casey had alluded to. Item number 6, we'll get to the budget. Okay, let me see here. Give me 1 second.
Page 56. 56.
56, thank you. It was in the 50s. Excellent. So we should have, Mr. Wahlberg, would you like to come to the podium? We'll go through, as we've done with the other budget meetings. Thank you, sir. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Jay, sit in the middle. That's his penance. Good? Thank you, Jay.
We're good, thank you.
So, if you like, I'll turn it over to you, and we can go through as we've done with the other budget meetings.
I think everyone had the opportunity to go through the proposed budget. And basically, this budget, we sat down with the WPCA committee and went through all the line items for the 2019 budget. And we came up with I believe, a workable budget going forward for this fiscal year. And I just want to mention one thing, is that fiscal year 2018, there were some adjustments that we had to make. There were small adjustments to comply with the approved budget. But basically, I can go right through it here. The labor is basically a union. We're obligated under the union contractual agreement. And based on our current manning level, the figure stands as it is. We have the regular supplementary overtime, and also the benefits associated with it, which consist of the pension fund, payroll taxes, the health insurance, the life disability, the 401A retirement plan, the small longevity. We also have what they call a contractual settlement. Keep in mind that the contract did expire in 2017. We have 1 year, which we have to account for and hold in abeyance in our balance sheet until that contract is approved. Outside of the personnel, we go into the operating portion of it, and basically with the help of Tom, we were able to make all these figures realistically to handle the operation of the plant. And that's basically it. Now, there's one thing that we did that was different from the prior year. We had to take out the capital plan. It doesn't belong here. The capital plan should be outside of the operating budget. because basically it has a useful life greater than the 12 months that we're budgeting here for. So that's a common, ordinary, and proper accounting. Basically, that budget consisted of basically a capital outlay. John Casey has several items that he's working on with the Clean Water Fund. And also we have the capital equipment, which is the needs of the WPCA. And that's basically it. And I open the floor up for comments on this budget.
Thank you, Mr. Wahlberg. Any questions for Mr. Wahlberg? Mr. Can?
Thank you, Chair. Jay, I'd like to go back to the revenue side.
Sure.
There was some discussion last year and the year prior about the number of residential units that would be built. And in-law apartments came up and a couple of other factors that were not precisely defined. What would be the correct way to get an accurate inventory of our residential units so we knew what the multiplier was?
Basically, as we have in the past, we have relied on the assessor who basically determines how many units there's out there. Then we have the commercial component, and then there's a factor associated with that. What I would strongly advise the WPCA is to have an independent consultant do a rate study. So it would be independent, and they are, well, basically familiar with establishing the proper rates. Normally, I know in my experience with the city of Groton, we have always had a consultant come in to determine the rates. And this way here, it's determined independent of what we have done in the past. And that's my recommendation. As to your question, is it all-inclusive? Do I know for sure? I don't know. I really don't know. I have to rely on our existing method of applying to this, and a lot of this comes from our tax assessor. So,
Yeah, I'll just, as an example, in 2018, we represented 19,866 residential units. And you have new information from the assessor that it's actually 200 units shorter than that number. And that, I don't know that we've lost 200 units of housing in the town of Stratford. So it's more, whether it's a third party advising us on how to bill, we should still internally be able to count the number of residential units with.
I would think so. I really can't comment on that. I have to rely on what we have done in the past, and why it doesn't make sense. It should be 200 units left, less, but I really can't comment to that fact. I asked for the figures. I was given the figures.
Okay. Different question, if I may. Again, on the revenue side, there's in the middle of it's arrears, people who've not paid their sewer use fees, and that was as high as $390,000 in prior years. And the current year we're in, we projected $170,000 and also $175,000 for the year that we're discussing. Are our historical collections of the WPCA rates meeting our, maybe it's like a 96% collection rate, that the arrears would be half as large as they had often been historically?
What we have to do here, we have to take the, I guess the sewer use fee, the sewer use interest, and sewer use lien, we have to put all those together. And it may have been a bad allocation between those three categories. But in sum total, I think we come very close to, well, it'd be 300,000. Maybe, again, it's an educated guess. When I look at the sewer use fee arrears, I'm looking at an actual from 2017 of 10,000, yet we're budgeting 100,000. I would have to really look into that, and maybe it's not being categorized correctly.
No, but when you add them up,
But
we're
in the aggregate,
stable.
in the aggregate, I think
Yes.
we're pretty close.
One more question on this page of revenue. The last row that's called utilization of fund balance, that we do have a enterprise fund that has assets of the sewer lines, the water treatment plant, and it has a cash balance that's accumulated from prior year's rate payments. The utilization of fund balance is a negative. Can you describe to us?
Yes, I can. When we have a utilization of, in a balanced budget, revenue and expenses are always balanced, okay? And how is it balanced? Well, utilization of fund balance is that if the revenues are greater than the expenses, it flows into a fund balance. In this case here, based on our estimate, we have expenses and we have revenues. Now, keep in mind that we haven't set the rate base on these things here, so we're using 2018 figures. If we were to use that, we would anticipate that we would add to fund balance around $750,000.
Okay.
Okay, and that would be utilized for capital improvements and other issues that the WPCA may have in their plans.
Can I keep going? Sure. Thank you, sir. Tom, I want to thank you for emphasizing preventative maintenance, and that's reflected in this proposed budget, that if we invest those small dollars today, we're going to prevent catastrophic dollars tomorrow. So let's hope these amounts will give us that predictability in operations. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I'm going to ask about capital improvement and the CIP, CEP, if you will, and the portion that's to be paid by WPCA. Jay, you just mentioned it needs to be brought below the line, and I'm going to introduce the sewer revolving fund. That this is another fund that the town maintains. It's, let's say, covered through a state statute that says all connection charges need to be deposited in the sewer revolving fund. And all those accumulated monies then need to go into sewer improvement. And the value of that sewer revolving fund is now, well, it was $1.2 million last June at the end of the prior year.
Correct.
I'd like to, rather than using the WPCA fund balance to pay for our capital improvements, and rather than bonding money to pay for our capital improvements, that we use the sewer revolving fund monies for the purpose that the statute intends them to be used for, which is to pay for our capital improvements. So what's been recommended is $450,000 for equipment, $775,000 for CIP. That's after we give Mr. Casey congratulations for getting us the Clean Water Fund. So that's kind of a one-to-one. I'd like, if an amendment is appropriate, I'd like to make an amendment that we utilize the sewer revolving fund balance to pay for the capital improvements to the WPCA for the 2019 budget.
Time for discussion. Mr. Wahlberg to,
No, what I would like to add on this, Chris, is the fact that that's normal. We collect these funds. They are to be expended for capital improvements within the WPCA, and I think it's a good use. Funds that are idle or not used are subject to being returned back to the tax base. So that's a normal occurrence. So I fully encourage that.
how would it change the way the current CIP is structured now with the capital improvement regarding the statute that Mr. Can's proposing? What change of language would it be, if any?
I don't think there'd be any change at all. I just think it's, we just need approval here to say, okay, we're gonna use these funds we're gonna direct it to our capital equipment to be expended as their financing source.
What would that change, if anything, for this year's budget? Because
It has no change at all because it's outside of the budget.
Okay.
We took it out of the budget because it, you know.
right, I just want to make sure it wouldn't affect anything that Mr. Casey's working on in terms of the. Okay. Mr.
One,
yeah.
thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
If we look at our CIP book, it's broken out, you have the individual projects, and then they're categorized by which department kind of owns the project. Could be Board of Ed, could be Public Works. And then it's also broken out by the funding source. So sometimes the town pays cash for certain things. Most of the time it bonds money to pay for certain things. Historically, EMS paid for its own ambulances out of its enterprise fund, and the we get some state monies which pay for some of our capital improvements. The last source is the WPCA Enterprise Fund. So you'll go to this year's capital book and you'll see what historically the WPCA Enterprise Fund has been contributing to pay for its share of capital, and that's those two numbers, about this 1.2 million for the current year. So instead of coming out of the WPCA Enterprise Fund, it would come out of the revolving fund. So that would just be kind of a substitute of funding sources, but all projects would get funded, all projects that were prioritized for this year's CIP.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. O'Brien?
Since we're being asked to consider accepting more flow from Shelton, I'm curious about where is it shown here under revenues? Does the city of Shelton pay us? Do we bill their residents? How does all that all work?
As far as the infrastructure, Bill, I don't know. Is a revenue inclusive here? At this point here, I doubt it. I think it has to be calculated and part of the rate base. And I don't know how much flow they are anticipating, and certainly it's, I just can't comment on that.
If,
Tom is the one for this question. How do we track their flow?
well, if I might interject for one moment, regarding the question pertaining to the amendment, I want to stay on point for that right now. Yeah, so, but I have no problem coming back to it. Any other questions regarding the change, the amendment by Mr. Can? Mr. Timniak? Yes, sir.
On April 3rd, the town council is going to be reviewing the CIP overall budget at that time. I mean, I guess you clearly have the option to do it tonight or do it there and then make the adjustment for your April meeting when you hear the whole thing. I just want to remind people that CIP is scheduled for April 3rd.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. Hearing none. We'll take a vote on Mr. Can's amendment. And if you could state it again, Mr. Can, I'd appreciate it.
That in, as the funding source for the WPCA's capital improvement and capital equipment expenditures as outlined in the proposed 2019 budget, that we use the sewer revolving funds resources to fund those capital projects rather than the WPCA enterprise fund.
Motion's on the table. Do I hear a second? There was a second by Mr. Kadim. Okay, so we will take a vote on this. And actually, can I ask one question? We don't have Mr. Floric here. I just wanted to ask one question. Oh, Mr. Marino, if you don't mind, just one question, sir. Thank you. I forgot. I didn't see you back there. I got to wear my glasses.
Doing my best to hide.
That's okay. Just in regards to changing, I guess I want to make sure I completely understand. We're changing the wording in the way the statute, where the funds are coming from, correct?
I don't know if it's a statute or we're just changing the source of the fund.
We're changing the source of the funds. And Mr. Marino, if I may, Mr. Can's amendment regarding how we're changing the source of the funds is, where do you stand on that? In terms of changing it from the capital improvement to the state statute sewer revolving fund.
And I just want to make clear, so what we're talking, there's a motion to amend on the floor.
Yes.
To take the funds from the statutory
Revolving fund.
revolving fund.
Correct.
I don't, as opposed, rather than from just the budget.
Instead of bonding.
Instead of bonding.
Yes.
Yes. That's, I don't have an issue with that.
Okay.
All right. As long as it's been seconded and it gets the will of the body.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Okay. Yes.
I just want
Mr.
to
Timmer.
re-clarify what I just said. You guys are voting on the funding source. You're actually not voting on the actual projects. You can discuss the projects on the April 3rd, the merits of it, and you can pull back. But tonight you're making the decision to pull the funding from the revolving fund, which I think is fine, if you want to do that.
Okay.
Instead of bonding.
Instead of bonding. Would it be your,
Excuse me. Is there still going to be bonding?
Yes.
I just want, and the appropriation language of the, related to the bond, I just want to have clarity to make sure, to the extent that you were originally doing, going out for a bond, and there was specific language that's associated with that appropriation through the bond, it's okay to change the source. I just want to make sure that if, with respect to the remaining, anything else that might be bonded, that any appropriation language would be appropriate. So I just would want to look at that language.
It's just equipment, right? You're not talking about.
No, the capital, you know, Chris, we've, so it adds up to about for the WPCA portion of the capital improvement or the capital equipment is not usually bonded. The town side of that is bonded.
Okay.
The monies come out, the WPCA's share comes out of WPCA's enterprise fund, which is the accumulated cash that happens to have built up over time. And then we have this parallel fund. So this builds up through rate fees, $396 per household, commercial people pay based on the use of the water. So often there's a positive cash flow, and so the funds there have built up. At the same time, we have connection fees that go into this statutory sewer revolving fund, and that is built up to $1.2 million. And the intention of that, per statute, is to be used for the payment of bonds or for capital improvements. So we're not setting now, Chris, that we approve individual projects. That we'll do next week. We're just saying that once the projects are approved, to the extent that it's able, we use the sewer revolving fund as the funding source rather than the WPCA's enterprise fund
For
as the
cap.
funding source.
Mr. Marino?
Yeah, based upon the current state of where that bond language would be, I don't have any concerns of what you're doing.
You do not?
I do not, no.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Timiak, just from a CIP, sorry, Chris, bring it back. Just from a CIP, CEP budget meeting, would you like to see us discuss this further in those budget meetings? Or based off Ms. Marino being okay with it as well, are you okay with it as well?
No, I'm okay with it. If you want to take it out of that, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
We were just having a side conversation about making sure the bonding language is set, which we haven't done yet.
Okay.
Because when we go out to bond, you can't change it once it's in place, and we're not at that stage
At that
right
stage.
now. All these projects, which are listed here, we'll talk about the merits of them on the April 3rd. If this body wants to go ahead and make the decision to pull it all out of capital, I'm sorry, the fund, I don't see any reason why we would be slow to embrace that.
Okay. And do you feel we should have the language added in per the bonding?
You're not bonding for this.
Excuse me, okay.
You just be paying for it.
Thank you.
Cash
Good
deal.
point. Just like the general fund.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good job, Greg. Any other questions? All right, so we'll call a vote on this now. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Okay. Any opposed? None. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Going back to Jay, I feel like it was a while ago, Jay. So, yes, Mr. Ken.
I'm going to make one more observation and give Jay an opportunity to respond. Over the years, there was this concept of overhead allocation and in-kind services. And this would be the town of Stratford looking to the WPCA and its other enterprise funds to be reimbursed for the services the town did on behalf of those funds. Mr. Casey's employed by the town, but spends a significant amount of time with WPCA business. The WPCA should reimburse the town for those services. The same with payroll, tax collector's office, because they give the WPCA bills. Those were substantiated to about $660,000. What we have in our book this year is the last expense line, the transfer applied overhead, $900,000. I emailed everyone this morning that if the $900,000 was too much. You could find a dozen reasons why it's the right amount. It's just substantiating it in a way that's easily explained to a regular consumer or the ratepayer especially. So the ratepayer recognizes that the money that they're investing in their sewer system is being used for the sewer system and not otherwise being used to pay expenses that should be paid by our property taxes. So I'm comfortable agreeing with the $900,000 that's in the book. I just want us all to be attentive that we assure that the ratepayers of the WPCA remain liable for their expenses and not get charged for the town's general expenses, as those general expenses should be paid through tax revenues, not WPCA revenues. Thank you. That was more a statement than a question.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Can. Any other questions for Mr. Wahlberg? No? Okay. Hearing none. Any other questions in general by the WPCA board regarding the budget for any other individuals? No? Okay. With that, I will entertain I'm sorry, Mr. Kadim. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn by Mr. Kadim, seconded by Mr. O'Brien. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you, guys.